Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see a crowd here this afternoon. Thank you for coming to Ream Library for the McFarland Center's first Global Catholicism-themed talk of 2025. My name is Brent Otto, and I'm Global Catholicism Fellow in the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture here at Holy Cross. The McFarland Center sponsors an array of campus lectures, as many of you know, discussions, conferences, and conversations which foster dialogue on questions of meaning, morality, mutual obligation, as well as initiatives to foster Jewish and Christian understanding and enhance our understanding of Catholicism from a global perspective. Today, I am very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Robyn Andrews. Welcome, Robyn, to our campus. Robyn joins us all the way from New Zealand, where she left summer behind in order to experience a New England snowstorm this past weekend. Robyn is a social anthropologist specializing in South Asia, and particularly India's mixed-race minority, the Anglo-Indian community. Her monograph, Christmas in Calcutta, is an ethnographic exploration of the constellation of Anglo-Indian identity in a particular place, in Calcutta, a small, tightly knit community within one of India's megacities. Robyn's other research interests lie in social inequality, migrant experiences, aging, and religion. She earned her PhD at Massey University, where she then was Associate Professor of Anthropology until her retirement at the end of 2023, though Robyn remains affiliated as Senior Research Fellow. I've had the pleasure of working with Robyn on several research projects concerning Anglo-Indian religious affiliation and identity, the place of religion in the life of mixed-race migrants to the West, as well as Marian devotion and pilgrimage and its significance to Indian Catholics. Robyn and I together co-edit the International Journal of Anglo-Indian Studies, a journal dedicated to the interdisciplinary study of India's mixed-race community. Today, Robyn will discuss her current research on immigrant churches, New Zealand's Catholic parishes, and how they're being transformed in multiple ways by the settling of Catholic immigrants from South and Southeast Asia. She raises questions of continuity and change in the life of these organic praying communities, of accommodation to new traditions alongside old ones, navigating the internal diversity of the church's rites and their various adherents, how belonging is constituted in a local church where its members are global in origin, as well as questions of authority and models of parish leadership. While Robyn's research is based in New Zealand, many of her findings will no doubt have resonances with the experience of the church in the United States as well. Robyn, we look forward to your presentation and to ask you questions afterwards. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Robyn to our community.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings, that's a te reo greeting. Thank you, Brent, for your warm introduction and the McFarland Centre for making it possible for me to be here on this beautiful campus for a few days. The snow is a real novelty to me, even in the winter. So I've taken lots of photos and sent them home. So it's great to be here. I know there's competition for this particular time, so I appreciate that you are here. So it's nice to see staff, to see faculty as well as students, as well as friends. So thank you for that. Okay, to set the scene, I'm going to borrow a quote from my grandson's school speech. The title of the speech was, the framework of the speech was Unity and Diversity, and he decided to look at religion in that sort of context. And this is what he said about attending Christmas Mass with me and his mum. He said, "It's as if every country had sent a representative to Mass. The church was full, as Ollie noticed. The parishioners were ethnically diverse. We know, though, through observation, research, census reports, that a major trend is significant declines in church attendance over the last few decades. So against the trend, though, are Catholic parishes in Aotearoa, New Zealand, refilling with recently arrived migrants, particularly Catholics from South India and the Philippines, but also from other countries, as observed by Ollie. This trend has altered the composition of these parishes in unprecedented ways, as well as countering the narrative of declining religious practice, a narrative that is common in many Western nations. What I became particularly interested in, both as an anthropologist and as a co-religionist, I'm a fellow Catholic, is how this transformation is playing out for the church as an institution and for the people involved. It's not that migration and the social and cultural changes it brings is new to Catholicism in New Zealand, nor is it unique to New Zealand. So I'm going to divert briefly to tell you from my research to fill the migration history background. First of all, looking at where New Zealand is. Okay, tiny, the little country at the bottom right-hand corner. So it was a wee way to fly here on Saturday. And I'm using the name, I will use the name Aotearoa New Zealand sometimes. That's Te Reo, Maori name first, and New Zealand. But sometimes I'll just say New Zealand or Aotearoa, more likely New Zealand. Okay, so the official start of the story for Catholicism in New Zealand was French Bishop Pompallier's arrival in the Bay of Islands in 1838. And the 12th of January is the anniversary of the first Catholic Mass in 1838. At that time, this land mass at the bottom of the Pacific Island was populated primarily by Maori, Aotearoa's indigenous population, with the British making considerable inroads in colonising the country by that time. With the British, Christianity had arrived already, mostly via Anglican and Wesleyan missionaries. It was just 2 years after Bishop Pompallier's arrival that Maori representatives signed a treaty, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi, with the British Crown. So that was in 1840. This gave Britain the right to govern and settle the country, while Maori retained authority over their lands and resources. And this treaty is New Zealand's foundational document. It's contentious though, like many of these things are. It was written in both English and Te Reo, so it's contentious in terms of how it was translated. There's slightly different meanings of both. Also how it's been interpreted and implemented. And for a long time, actually, not immediately after, but then for a long time it wasn't really implemented at all. Okay, so in order for Catholicism to spread through the country, Bishop Pompallier and his order of Marist brothers from France learnt both English and Maori. They travelled by schooner around the North and South Islands and introduced and organised mission stations. So Pompallier dedicated the nation to our Blessed Mother Mary's Assumption, and the 15th of August is still observed as a holiday of obligation. The next major wave of immigration to impact the church was by the Irish. So by 1850, so not that much after that much time had passed after Pompallier had come, the Irish were establishing a New Zealand diocese with the blessing of the Vatican. This was after the Vatican was petitioned by New Zealand Catholics with objections about Pompallier's imperious and lavish style. Other European Catholic groups were also influential in pockets in New Zealand's early Catholic history, but the Irish were the most significant until well after World War II. So Peter Lynham, who is New Zealand's foremost religious historian, says that New Zealand, like Australia, welcomed relatively few Southern European Catholic migrants after World War II. Thus, the New Zealand church remained dominated by Irish Catholics and dependent on Irish clergy and nuns. This Irish-influenced church has been identified by Joe Graylin, who is a Catholic priest and theologian, and writes quite a lot about these things, particularly the early churches, as New Zealand's second church, which he refers to as the settler church. The next major change, leading to what Graylin identifies as the third church, is the Pacifica Church. In the 1970s, Catholics and others from nearby Pacific Islands came in their tens of thousands to fill factory positions, mainly in Auckland, but in other places in the Upper North Island as well. And Graylin notes that the Pacifica Church is strong where Pacifica have settled and formed local worshipping communities. So they're still strong there. And he comments that language and cultural identity remains strong for Pacifica Church communities, and without language and cultural skills, entry is mostly impossible for outsiders. One strong and unique element of the Pacifica Church is the role of the catechist, which has enabled many Pacifica communities to continue without being clergy-led or clergy-dependent. So this migration wave saw pockets of change in particular geographical areas, rather than being a nationwide impact. The next church, the fourth church, which is the context of my research, is described by Graylin as broadly Asian. And it includes people from Southeast Asia, North Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and India, amongst other countries. I've highlighted the Philippines and India because that's what I'm focusing on. And of this church, he says, the advent of the fourth church is changing the contemporary face of Catholicism. In some places, this is quite rapid. Overall, we are struggling, without the help of sociologists and anthropologists, to understand the deep complexity of our experience of change, especially now as the dominant settler church begins to feel the impact of decline and cultural change. So the Asian church is more widespread than the Pacifica Church was, or still is, as the populations bringing about these changes are living all over New Zealand in concentrated pockets of particular parishes, but right throughout the country. Nowadays, the settler, the Pacific, and the Asian churches coexist. At the same time as these immigrant-related changes are putting some pressure on the church and its communities, there has, over the last 3+ decades, been a growing social expectation that the country's indigenous language and cultural symbols will be more widely used. So this is in all areas, in government, in education, and also in the churches. So in 1995, the New Zealand Bishops' Conference released a bicultural statement, which included these words. In the Treaty of Waitangi, we find the moral basis for our presence in Aotearoa New Zealand and a vision that sets this country apart. And in 2012, as part of living the treaty commitments, all Catholic parishes received the new translation of the Roman Missal, a bilingual missal. Now the stars represent the Southern Cross here. So it has, so it's bilingual, and the way it's organised, it has wherever you open the missal, it has English on one side and Te Reo on the other side. So it's in this context of the church in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that I carried out the research that I'll spend the rest of today reporting on some aspects of it and discussing. So to investigate the impact of the most recent immigration wave, I carried out ethnographic research in 3 parishes and 1 Aotearoa New Zealand diocese. The research included participant observation and interviews with close to 60 people. My interviews were with recently arrived immigrant parishioners from South India and the Philippines, as well as with long-standing parishioners. I also interviewed priests and parish administrators. The research was carried out with the enthusiastic endorsement of the diocese concerned. Of course, I needed to seek permission to carry it out, but they were very enthusiastic about it. In fact, they were quite keen to fund some of the research, which I didn't do and didn't need because I had university funding. They even suggested which parishes to focus on, identifying 3 parishes most impacted by immigration. As you can imagine, I had a lot of data, both observations and interview material. It's been a challenge, a welcome challenge, to organise the selection of that into a presentation for today. So in this presentation, as outlined in the description, I look at the tensions and challenges as well as the hope around the experience of immigration of Asian Catholics. In terms of hope, I've identified what I call vital signs, which, just as used in medical situations, index health and vitality, strength, and consequently hope. By looking at specific signs and what they mean, I end with a discussion of whether the signs point to a hopeful future for the parishes, the 3 parishes I spent time in, and for the church. So to build up to this discussion, I look at these 4 areas. So I look at changes observed from the point of view of long-standing parishioners and priests, so Pākehā European priests. What migrant parishioners say about their involvement in church life, so that's the point of view of the migrants, of course. How they are involved with the local faith community, again, point of view of the migrants. And also how recently arrived immigrants' participation impacts on the look, feel, and practice of Catholicism in these 3 churches in New Zealand. I look at that through those 3 parishes, but this sort of thing is happening through New Zealand more broadly than the 3 parishes, of course. So in terms of the changes observed, following my grandson Ollie's observation, the first change identified and addressed by long-standing parishioners and Pākehā priests, Pākehā is the term used it's a te reo term used for non-Māori, usually people of European descent who are New Zealanders. So one of the changes that the parishioner demographics, is that the parishioner demographics are different to what they were. They were mostly Pākehā-filled churches, and now there's much more diversity. The other change is that the churches are full when they were in decline. So Peter Lynham, who I referred to earlier as a New Zealand historian, religious historian, has shared with me this slide to illustrate in another New Zealand diocese some of the figures. So he does a lot of work with census, church census, as well as the national census. So he attributes the rise in mass attendance between 2001 and 2004 primarily to Filipino immigration and devotion in Auckland. I was also provided these figures just last Friday from the diocesan office of the diocese I was working with. They had just compiled them for the next 10-year period. So from 2000, so this is in one of the parishes, one of the migrant parishes that I carried out the research in. So 2012, the average church attendance number was 289. By 2024, 485. You can see this sort of dips too, because 2018 it also got to 485 being the average. So it built up quickly from about 2012, and it's mainly, in this church, it's mainly Sierra Malabar South Indians who have added to those numbers. You can see there's a bit of a dip, but that's COVID. In fact, I think those red marks probably mark the COVID sort of years where, the numbers are still quite good, but they were lower. And we had masses by Zoom, that sort of thing, over that time, and of course that wasn't counted. Okay, so from my research interviews though, I've got a couple of quotes about parishioner composition. So that's about the numbers, and this is about the composition. So this first is from a Pākehā, so New Zealand European parish priest who's now in his 80s. He had served in the same parish until the late 1980s, then went overseas for a couple of decades. When he came back in the early 2010s, he comments on the changes that he saw and identifies the two main groups that I focus on. He says, and when I came back, like when I left, it was pretty monocultural. When I came back, it was very diverse. Also, the diversity had changed. When I was here, we had a few people from Kiribati and from Samoa and some from Tonga. So Polynesian or Melanesian, I think it's Micronesian actually. And when I came back, it was Filipino and Indian diverse. And this next quote is by a long-standing parishioner. That's what she said about the demographics of her church now. She'd been in the same parish for over 30 years, one of the three. And she said, well, the greatest proportion of people who attend the Mass are Indian, with a good number of Filipinos and Pacific Island, Tongan people. And the Pākehā population is quite minimal. Yep, we are still there though. Long-standing parishioners also observed changes in the look and feel and practices brought about by the presence of these new groups. I'll discuss these shortly, but I turn now to what migrants said about their involvement in church life, from their initial experience of finding a parish church to becoming involved in one. So the next couple of slides have quotes in response to the question about that I asked about their involvement in parish life. The first quote is from a Filipino about the impetus to find a church when arriving in a new place. And the second is from a Keralite, a South Indian from Kerala, which touches on more ongoing reasons for involvement. So the first, by the Filipino, said, how we found this parish is you basically have to find a church. As a Filipino and a Catholic, it's been in our way of life to go to church every Sunday. So it's the first thing we do wherever we are, to find a church. So find a church and go to church. It's like your Sunday will not be complete without church. So that's the first thing we did in our first week, is to find where is the nearest church. And from an Indian parishioner who hadn't been here for very long, I still remember going to the parish the first day, in 2018. And what I have to tell about the parish is that it's very, very much welcoming. The people of this parish, I still feel that from day one till now, I feel the same. Everybody is welcoming. That's the thing. Then we have our community, the Indian community masses here. In both cases, and shared across the migrant interviewee responses, is that their faith is central to their life and identity. And their faith practice needs to be carried out in community, as opposed to being only in private personal relationship with God. This echoes some of Brent and my earlier research with diasporic Catholic Anglo-Indians, who had been very involved in church life in India, in Catholic church life in India. When Anglo-Indians left India, they also prioritised finding a Catholic church to join as part of settling into their new country. So as well as meeting the requirements of Sunday Mass attendance and community with others, church parishes as faith-based communities are well known and researched for providing an immediate network for many migrants, and frequently gives migrants a place to belong and a new sense of family and home. The next point I cover extends an understanding of the significance of the new migrants' faith and the way they practice, by providing some detail of what they're involved in their new parishes. So how migrants are involved with their faith communities are multifaceted. They're very much part of the fabric of their local Roman Catholic parish. Roman Catholicism is the Catholic rite most commonly practiced in New Zealand, as here, I believe. This is illustrated by their filling the pews every Sunday for Mass, mostly as family groups. New migrants increasingly are taking on ministry roles in Masses too, for example, as musicians, readers or lectors, Eucharistic ministers, as well as starting to serve on parish committees. Actually, another role they take on is of altar servers. Most of our altar servers at the moment are Surrey Malabar, but there are also Pacific Islanders and Filipinos and a few Pākehā children serving. So they're starting also to serve on parish committees, but that's where they're being encouraged to, but they're only starting to take up those invitations to serve in that way. But they also operate outside of New Zealand's traditional Roman Catholic Church sphere of practices, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. So as a response to the change in parishioner ethnicities, the Aotearoa New Zealand Catholic Church has established chaplaincy roles to serve the different major migrant groups. These assigned chaplains offer culturally specific services to different ethnic groups. For example, they offer regular masses in a native language, such as Tagalog for Filipinos and Malayalam for the Indian community, who are mostly from Kerala. Many of the Malayalam native speakers in the parishes I carried out research in were brought up as Syro-Malabar Rite Catholics, and as such they adhere to their liturgy with Syriac origins rather than Latin, which is more colloquially called the Roman Rite. As many of you will know, the Latin Rite and the Syriac rites are just two of the more than 20 Catholic Church rites, or semi-independent, culturally and historically specific liturgical traditions. But they all those 20 plus, share the same fundamental theology and acknowledge the Pope's authority over them. So while many of the immigrants from Kerala and South India are not Roman Catholics but Syriac, as Catholics they may participate in any of the Catholic rites. A Syro-Malabar Mass is held twice a month in one of the parishes I spent research time in, and is offered once a month in the other two. These Masses are celebrated in the language of Malayalam, which is the official language of the state of Kerala. Filipinos, on the other hand, are Roman or Latin Catholics, as Catholicism was brought to the Philippines by the Spanish, who used that rite. And one church, just in the last month, has begun offering Masses in Tagalog at 2 o'clock once a month on a Sunday. So things are, still, moving along and hopefully being of, real assistance. So other activities I was told about and also observed outside of what the church organises, and mostly without a priest presiding or attending, were migrant-led. For example, a number of Filipinos meet as rosary groups, particularly through the month of October, when they meet every evening at one of their homes. And this is organised by roster up to a year in advance. One October is just finished and people are writing to the organiser asking for this date or that date in October, because that's the day they would like to have the rosary at their place, which also involves having the statue of Our Lady in their house for 24 hours. So they request birthdays or anniversaries or dates of some significance to them. The Filipino groups also meet for choir practice. They offer music ministry to a number of churches in the diocese. They're really in demand too. They go, the same choir in one city will sing at 2 or 3 different parishes over the course of the month. They're on everybody's roster. They also hold monthly Couples for Christ meetings. In one parish I spent research time in. These Couples for Christ meetings were described as providing womb-to-tomb formation and worship. They also have a Santo Niño or Infant Jesus group. This group centralises the Infant Jesus with a festival on the 3rd Sunday in January. So on this day, many New Zealand Filipinos go to Auckland to celebrate with the large group of Catholic Filipinos who live there. In fact, the festival is reportedly the biggest annual gathering of Filipinos in New Zealand. The various activities led by Filipino Catholics generally involve refreshments and hospitality. So it's a social time to get together, as well as religious time. A number of those I spoke to talked about fellow Filipino parishioners, particularly those in their Rosary or their Santa Nina groups, as family. I've got a quote from one here who says, yeah, we miss going to church with my parents, all my relatives, because that's usually on a Sunday. That's where we meet your cousins, friends. But in saying that, this is the reason why the group, so the Rosary group or the Santa Nina group, we feel like this is our family now, our new family now. These Filipino parishioners invite others from their parishes along to their activities, particularly for their Rosary activities, and they conduct them in English. But few take up the invitation. Some do, though, and perhaps their numbers will grow. I went along as part of the research. I went along to 1 week, which culminated at the end of October with a mass and a wonderful dinner of Filipino food. The benefits of ethnographic research, participant observation research. Okay, the Saramalabar group from Kerala also meets regularly, mostly in small home-based prayer and rosary groups. School-aged children meet for catechism or Bible study in their rite, the Syriac rite. In one parish, about 200 attend most school term Sundays after Mass. So they have quite a few teachers or parents who help out with that as well. And that's in their rite, in the Syriac rite. And they run a youth group that meets twice a month, so that's high school age. In addition, they hold extra celebrations around particular church festivals, such as Easter and Christmas. For example, just prior to Christmas, many members of the Saramalabar community come together over the course of several evenings and travel by bus, which they have enough people in the community who can drive buses to be able to do this themselves. They just have to hire the bus. They go to each of the Saramalabar parishioners' homes who've requested a visit. This is all organised on WhatsApp. They're very, very organised through WhatsApp. In each home, they sing carols and other Christmas songs, admire the home's nativity scenes, and bless the homes they're in. Then they move to the next one. And they do this, it's so in demand that most evenings coming up to Christmas, the week coming up to Christmas, they're on the buses and visiting each other's homes. This is a fun, noisy, festive family event. The Saramalabar groups also mostly meet without a priest, and their worship and other activities are in the language of Malayalam. That pre-Christmas get-together, the songs and the hymns are in Malayalam too. I went along and I recognised the tunes. I knew what they were singing by the tunes, but not the words. So because most of them are in Malayalam, it makes it difficult to extend an invitation to other members of the parish to join them. Although, as I say, as a researcher, I was invited along and, of course, accepted. And one parish celebrated a Saramalabar Mass in English, so rather than in Malayalam, so that interested non-Saramalabar parishioners could get a sense of what was involved. This was really useful. A few of us went along to this particular parish that held this, and it did give people a sense of how different it is, therefore how different the Roman rite is all the other Sundays that there is not a Saramalabar or a Syriac rite mass that they can go to. So I think that was useful. So New Zealand is part of the Australasian Saramalabar diocese. Australasian is Australia and New Zealand. They have a bishop who's based in Sydney. So Saramalabar parishioners are part of the Saramalabar diocese as well as part of their New Zealand diocese. So in addition, except for COVID disruptions, they maintain strong ties. Well, they still maintain the ties, but except for then, they also travel back to India, sometimes annually, but in order to celebrate the sacraments. So they celebrate the sacraments of baptism, First Communion, and marriages in their original parishes in India. Whenever they can, they do that. So they are formed, they receive the training, that's not the right word for it, the preparation. They receive the preparation for these sacraments in New Zealand, and they have to take a signed certificate back to their parish in India to say they have been prepared for the sacraments, but then they have the sacraments in India. So in this way, they can celebrate with their families and friends in their first language of Malayalam and within the Siri-Malabar rituals that they feel the most comfortable in. So in the diocese that I carried out research in in the diocese, Siri-Malabar immigrants receive a lot of support. For example, in one parish, 2 parish priests are both from Kerala. One was actually trained in the Roman rite and the other was trained in the Syriac rite. It's the closest, that parish though is the closest to feeling like a Siri-Malabar church in any that I've spent time in or heard about. Even so, the overwhelming majority of their masses are in the Roman rite and they're in English. And the various parish committees still comprise mostly of older, long-standing Pākehā parishioners. There's an awareness from both the priests and the Siri-Malabar community that they are first and foremost a parish serving the New Zealand Catholic populations. One parish priest I spoke to made a point of saying, no, we're not just here for the Indians. They are to serve all people of the parish. So here's another quote from an interview with a young adult from the Siri-Malabar community. The Indian migrants appear to have been made aware of the need to support the local church, not just take the Siri-Malabar aspects of it. Okay, so she said, because the thing is that here we have 2 Indian priests. Even when the bishop came, he was telling us that, so you have to support the local church. Without the local church, you cannot survive here. You have to support the local church in whatever ways you can. At the same time, we have our Siri-Malabar community also in parallel, she says. The activities of the migrant groups, both alongside and parallel to the rest of the parishioners, cannot help but change how the church feels. This is what I look at next. In this last section, so it looks at recently arrived migrants' impact on the look and feel and practices of religiosity in the broader Catholic Church, as contributed by these migrant groups. As I describe next, this is where there are tensions and challenges for the way ahead, as well as hope for the future of the Catholic Church, particularly through the growth of migrant parishioner numbers and the renewed energy they bring. So these are some observations about migrant contributions on the aesthetics, the look and feel, as well as the practices of these churches. So as well as observing some of these changes myself through participant observation, it was these dimensions that interviewees, mostly long-standing parishioners, pointed out. So they said that the statues of the Virgin Mary are often elaborately adorned, especially during the Rosary group sessions, but the adornments remain for some time. One comment, or a few people commented on, but one of the comments was that the beautiful native timber altars are now covered with liturgical cloths. Now just the next, you can see there the liturgical cloths covering the kauri, one of the types of native woods that we sort of value, and it was put there, you know, especially selected, especially made, but now it's covered. Another point was that artificial flowers are used more than in the past, replacing fresh ones. Another comment was that incense is more regularly used during masses, although that's been reduced in the parish that used it most. I mean, some of the long-standing parishioners liked this about the change. They liked the incense because it reminded them of when they grew up. But others said it gives them hay fever, and they found it difficult to sing. So, you know, it's so they commented more than just on the fact that it is a difference. Some of the other changes, that there are new hand gestures that have been introduced in several places through Mass. For example, when reciting the Lord's Prayer. And there are changes in body practices, such as kneeling during the Eucharistic prayers. Now, I know that is done in other places, but in the diocese that I carried out this research, the previous bishop had advocated and educated us on standing throughout the Eucharistic prayer. There's also more diversity in liturgical elements, with Filipino and Tongan choirs added to the musical roster and songs in the languages of church members. There's also a more conservative element. This was what people said to me too, being introduced back into the masses via the migrants, but taken up by more conservative, longer-standing parishioners, mostly Pākehās. Such as wearing of headscarves or veils by women and taking the Eucharist or communion host on the tongue rather than in one's hand. Now, I know that some of these signs aren't necessarily of conservatism, but that is how the other parishioners in the pews are reading it. But I've had some interesting conversations recently about that it's not necessarily a sign of conservatism. So some of the changes from comments on the changes from interviewees include, one said there's too much, the change in liturgical furniture, well, not where it's been moved to, but the decorations and stuff don't look like us anymore. Another by this time a long-standing Pākehā priest said some cultures have different style and that they would be far more devotional, and maybe like the Filipino community, more inclined to want to sing, and the Indian community would be far more inclined to want to have very loud music and bright lights and balloons maybe and very bright colours. What I found interesting and somewhat paradoxical is that while for some long-standing parishioners it's too much ornamentation, too much sound, too much colour, too much smell, a number of the migrants talked about the muted masses and other liturgical practices here, in New Zealand, in comparison to what they're used to. And having spent time in India attending pilgrimages and masses, I can vouch for that. It is noisier. As everywhere, I'm sure, how well and happily a parish functions can be very dependent on the parish priest. And of course, some of the changes that are introduced by parish priests, not by the migrants sitting in the pews. I looked briefly at some of the dynamics and tensions for priests now before coming back to the final discussion about the health of these Catholic church parishes based on the research I've carried out. So in one of the parishes I spent time in, which was served by two Pākehā, so of European descent priests, the sense I had of their experience included them sometimes feeling quite overwhelmed by the huge demand on them and a lack of confidence about whether they get it right for migrants. I've got two quotes here. This first one is from a Pākehā priest who described the new activities and services he was called on to perform. He said, yes, like car blessings, house blessings are far more frequent, and also anniversary follow-ups to a death. It would be far more frequent to observe anniversaries or certain time lapses that traditionally are honoured, and engagements will be a formal liturgical celebration with meals afterwards. Whereas, the European culture that I know, he knows, does not do this. Another reflected on his ministry in the following way. He said, "I think the challenge is to know how to help them connect with our Lord, because I think they come out of a very different space to what you and I, well, I won't say you, but what I do." I said probably yes. And so I'm not sure whether the way we celebrate liturgy helps them to enter into an awareness of who they are in God's eyes and who they are. And that's what's really important. Their responses to changes in their priestly responsibilities might be seen as or be a result of their own life experiences. One priest was older, well-travelled, experienced, worldly, and is working out how best to serve the new parishioners. He's had a lot of experience with other ethnic groups. The other, younger, less travelled, less experienced priest primarily conveyed his anguish and stress about how demanding it was to have to accommodate a lot of differences in expectations, especially when some of the demands were culturally and liturgically quite unfamiliar. Another parish was ministered by migrant priests only. One of them, an Indian priest, said it was culturally very different in New Zealand from where he was from. And he said he came from a hierarchical tradition where he would, as he said, and I quote, "yell and boss people around," unquote. In comparison, what he found in New Zealand was a consultative and cooperative tradition. Plus, he said he had to get used to women being involved in parish decisions. He explained that while he had had no formal training and preparation for serving in New Zealand, he felt he was fortunate in initially living in community with a Pākehā priest, so he could follow his leader and ask questions. One Indian priest I interviewed said this. He said, "I think certain things we do back in India, we quite literally follow the teachings and practices and traditions from what comes from Rome, quite literally. That's what I felt. I think we try to literally implement it. But after coming here, I had to see the broader sense of the meaning in all these laws and the rules, actually, in order to reach out for people." He had also said that it had been quite eye-opening coming to New Zealand, and that these days he doesn't strictly follow the laws as he used to, but he feels he is a much more compassionate priest now. And he said he takes the example from Pope Francis. So at this stage, based on talking to priests as well as congregants, it appears there is little to no formal training for new priests to the diocese about the cultural norms and expectations in New Zealand. I was told by a priest in his 50th year of ministry, who has served in the same diocese throughout, that this wasn't actually always the case. More than 10 years ago, a set of modules was developed to help new priests settle in culturally and offer ongoing support for them. They had they had speakers, they had regular, as well as modules right at the beginning for an induction. They had regular modules following. But due to circumstances, including having no bishop for almost 5 years, this practice has been dropped. Priests from other countries now get a couple of weeks induction when they arrive, but that's to everything about New Zealand. You know, how to catch a bus, the banks, the driving licence, everything. And then monthly pastoral days where issues may be addressed. But the priest who told me about this said that it's too public to address particular pastoral issues in that way. I was also told by an older priest that parish councils and liturgy committees were expected to look after the priests and to guide them in the New Zealand ways. Interestingly, I'm on a liturgy committee, and we're never given that. We have never been told that. So the first I heard that this was part of the responsibility was in an interview. And given that these groups meet for about an hour and a half once a month, usually with a full agenda, you know, there's a bit of work to be done there. So based on the research, I have concerns for newly arrived migrant priests. I feel for them. I feel for their plight and not being adequately trained, I don't think, or enculturated. And based on my research, I also have concerns for Pākehā priests who are now serving parishioners whose needs and expectations are quite different to what they were used to. An understanding of this gap or omission in the preparation of priests, both new and longer standing, would be a valuable first step. Then what needs to follow is putting in place resources for training, perhaps mentoring of our priests. I don't know, I'm just starting to think about these things. Parishioners would also benefit from knowing more about what their fellow parishioners value and the way they prefer to practice their faith. Long-standing parishioners may then have a better understanding of how migrants have had to transition these practices to fit into the local scene as much as they do. There are few opportunities to cultivate better understanding between different groups of parishioners sitting along the pews from each other Sunday after Sunday. There are some opportunities, but not a lot. So in conclusion, I did, for all I've just been quite negative in the comments I've made, I think, or pessimistic, I should say, maybe. Overall, I did get a sense of positivity about the more energetic and alive church life, even with some frustrations. The long-standing parishioners I spoke with commented on how much they enjoy having a lot of family groups at Mass and full churches, for all that the changes took some getting used to. Quote. In each city I carried out research in, there was at least one option to go to a church that was less impacted, very much less impacted by newly arrived parishioners. The long-standing parishioners I interviewed said they intended to stay in the parishes they belonged to. I do need to add that the parishioners I interviewed were the ones who had stayed in the parishes. Anecdotally, I know there are a number who moved parishes, with many saying it was because of a change in Sunday Mass timings, because that happened at the same sort of time, rather than a change in culture. They didn't say that. Okay, as one observer of changes in New Zealand, Joe Grayland, who has written about this, as I said earlier, he says, there are many instances of positive integration and a heightened willingness to include various languages, hymns and songs in liturgical celebrations and create opportunities for social interactions. So while there are changes and tensions, I, along with others, see what I think of as vital signs in the church now, so signs of hope. So some of the signs I see of hope, I'm wrapping up now, are the full churches, just the numbers of parishioners at churches every Sunday. Also new energy that was commented on. And an openness, cautious at times for change and accommodations. I mean, this ebbs and flows. And also another sign of hope is the church providing services such as the chaplaincy, but also spaces, and not just physical spaces, but other ways of being part of the parish. And finally, a common mission, most importantly, they share a common mission to nurture and enhance the faith lives of individuals and communities. So the new migrant groups are making a space for themselves, both within and alongside other parish groups, drawing on the parishes, the broader Catholic Church, as well as their own resources. At this point, while the church can feel comprised of different parishioner strands that sometimes touch and merge, at other times diverge, I feel there is cause for hope. Thank you.